Okay, welcome to something that we are now calling Not Another Founder Podcast.
My
Should we do
name's
it now? Okay.
Martin. I'm co-founder of Tyke.
And I'm James, co-founder of Take.
There we go. See, now they know that it's Martin and James, the dynamic duo of Not Another Founder podcast. I'll also have to say that James has forever been practicing his smooth jazz voice for radio, and now he's finally on a podcast that he owns that he can actually practice on. So, welcome.
I have a
smooth
proper microphone too, so we'll be wheeling that out today.
Excellent.
We're going to take
Another
10 minutes.
Founder podcast.
That's it. 10 minutes of unscripted chat, no slides, to discuss the topics that are concerning us as founders. And a very relevant one today, which is MCP, because MCP seems to have come out of nowhere. Frankly, everyone is chatting about MCP. You can't go to a Gartner conference, you can't read LinkedIn without someone talking about how they are solving for MCP. Why? Why has that happened? Views, thoughts?
MCP, it's everywhere. Mainly because the AI conversation has moved from AI to agentic and enabling agents to do stuff. And in order to do those things, we need plug and play ways of giving them tools. And that has ended up becoming MCP, but it is not the only protocol that allows agents to do tool calling, but it is the most popular at the moment. So it's seen a bit of an explosion, even though it is a bit of a flawed protocol, and Anthropic and that team that are managing it have managed to, they're addressing some of the authentication issues now with regards to them MCP working better in an agentic world, but it's agents that are really driving it.
But why is that? Why has that got the cut through? Because as you said, there's other protocols available. There's people pushing other agendas. But why has MCP become just so far grown so fast? Why has it become the hot topic?
It got there first, and it got the hype first. It was actually, I feel like it was a bit. It came out. Everybody started talking about MCP when they first announced it as a simple way to talk to things. Then OpenClaw came out. And that exploded, and tool use became the main topic of how agents should do stuff. And so, because it was the first thing, and kind of like it was that whole 80-20 thing where essentially they came out first with it and they just own the market. It's not better than any of the other protocols. It's not inherently superb. It's actually really wasteful in terms of tokens and things like that. And even Anthropic have had to tone back and claw back how it gets managed. Like, nowadays, you won't even load up MCP skills into an agent. You load up skills, which are slightly different. And then the skills load up the MCP tools that they need dynamically in order to save on your token count. Because nowadays, token maxing is the the way we measure KPIs for developers.
So, I mean, if that's the case, are we still in a world of it's a demo toy? And it's the exciting domain of the innovation team, or is it delivering real value at scale in enterprise world?
Good question. I'd say a lot of industry wonks will tell you that it is delivering value at scale in enterprises. I have seen only a few real large agentic deployments. And I don't believe that people are using MCP for that. I think people are still going in and building agents. And when you're building an agent, you build it like any piece of software. You build it as a custom tool that's meant to do one thing, albeit slightly non-deterministically. But for personal agents and things like that, so the things that are meant to like Copilot and that are meant to sit in your computer and work with you, it's gained a lot of popularity. I do find that the main issue with MCP is everybody's got one, right? But they're quite hard to run and they're quite hard to install if you're trying to use them as a human. And it's different for each vendor, and there's still quite a bit of fragmentation. And if you're building an agent around it, you're just building another API wrapper. It's just the API you're talking to is an MCP one instead of a REST one. But again, here's the thing, code is super cheap now. So if you're building an agent, you can vibe code that API wrapper in 2 seconds. Why do you need MCP? The only reason you need MCP is because the vendor might provide it. And if the vendor provides it, so like your SaaS vendor or your database vendor or something like that, then it might be useful. But again, it has to be remotely managed. It has a whole bunch of security concerns. And I don't know if folks have read my blog post, but I'm pretty critical of MCP in general in terms of how it's being used and deployed. And I think any large enterprise that is considering using MCP as a sort of agentic API plug and play system needs to really consider carefully whether they really need all that engineering overhead on top of their APIs.
So the kind of bull case for MCP is that it's standardized, reusable, interoperable, and it's vendor delivered. But we're saying that the vendors themselves are not, and the protocol itself is not delivering security or governance or compliance.
No,
so
none of that.
You've still got to deliver that yourself. So
you do, and people, they use MCP gateways or AI gateways. They put it through their own proxies. One of the biggest problems with MCP at the moment is identity management. Especially think of it this way: like MCP is a remote procedure call system. It's meant to you're meant to call functions that do something. It's not like a REST API. REST APIs are for CRUD operations. They're mainly, well, at its philosophical core, REST APIs are there to build off of the foundations of how you interact with the data source, right? So it's meant to be idempotent atomic operations like reading something or writing a piece of data. Whereas RPC is much more like interacting with a more compute API and is probably more operational in terms of you'll be running multiple things at the same time in the business logic layer. So you might create an MCP function that will enroll a user, verify their email address, and then add them to your CRM system. But those are actually probably like 5 or 6 API calls. So you can wrap that up in an MCP server and turn it into a single function that your agent can call repeatedly and be confident in the fact that it's not going to screw up the process. Whereas if you just give an agent API access, it has to figure out that chain itself through documentation or whatnot in order to perform the operation that you're asking it to do. So MCP is really good at wrapping up business logic and putting that out there. And that's when you build. That's why I'm saying there's an engineering overhead to the whole thing. In terms of security and just in general, how you run them, there's a supply chain risk. And then the bigger problem is you have an agent. That agent has an identity. It calls an MCP server that can do stuff. The MCP server has to have an identity because it has to do things as the agent. But the agent might be working on behalf of a person. So you need the person's role transferred to the agent to be given the permissions to call those APIs that are in the MCP server. So the MCP server needs its own identity that is then backed by the agent, which is backed by the person. So you get this rolling chain of responsibility as it goes through the API calls that it has to do. And it becomes a real security nightmare. It's microservices, but like muddled up. It's like spaghetti microservices. Microservices at least were REST-based. They were idempotent. I do one thing and one thing only. So your permissions line are really clear. With MCP, that doesn't really happen anymore. You've just got these bundles of functions that suddenly need operational credibility.
So actually, in a world where people have become very comfortable with an open API spec, translating that straight to an MCP server doesn't make a great deal of sense because you're leaving off a bunch of the added value that comes from kind of crafting the MCP tools.
If you're just starting out, it's fine. Because especially if you're using, let's say, one of the SOTA models like Claude or GLM2 or OpenAI, they are smart enough to read the documentation and figure out an order of operations or roll back and fix their mistakes and memorize them and then create a spec, or you can just document it for them. But and the problem is it's not deterministic because they have to do it every single time.
Right.
So there is a way around this for REST APIs, and it's the Arazzo spec, where you can actually define workflows in REST APIs to do certain things, and you can create a definition for that. So for the OpenAI to MCP server sort of bridge, I figure the next real evolution of that would be an Arazzo spec to MCP server bridge, because then you are turning business logic into an MCP function. And that makes a lot more sense than just going straight from the OpenAI spec. But again, as I said, for a starter, it's fine. But if you're really serious about it, you probably want to code this thing yourself, or at least vibe code it.
Okay. Well, look, I know we said we'd try and keep this 10 minutes, and we singularly failed to do that. But if there's, as a closing point, if there's a CIO who's listening to this and they know their team are experimenting with MCP, what is the number one thing they should do when they get to their desk today? Is there something they should ask, something they should take action
on? Yeah. The first thing they need to ask is, when this agent is doing something with this MCP server, who is the agent? Who is the MCP server acting as? One of the key things is, at the moment, people are just shoving API tokens in there, and they're floating around with these applications so they can do stuff that, let's say, the user can't. And you have these privilege escalation concerns that are just hidden in the architecture of your MCP database that you've created. Because MCP servers are microservices. They're applications. They're not endpoints or definitions. They're pieces of software. So they can do silly things. They're backed by non-deterministic LLMs. So,
well, that's a CIO red flag straight away. Love it. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Martin. Good to chat.
You're welcome.
Next time we'll cover the thorny topic of sovereignty.
Sovereignty.
Speak to you then. Bye.